Entertaining, informative, and educational. Inspiring content that makes a difference.
This is the Maximus Troy Publications Broadcasting Network.
Join the Academy. The Breeders' Academy proudly presents Bred to Perfection with Kenny Troiano, a show for serious breeders.
Whether you are looking to create a new strain or simply improve an old one, you have come to the right place.
Daddy, I want more chickens.
Oh, boy.
Now, here's your host, Kenny Troiano.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Bred to Perfection. My name is Kenny Troiano, and this, my friends, is the podcast devoted to helping you become a better breeder and taking your strain to the next level. That's right, my friends. It doesn't matter if you are brand new to breeding or you've been breeding for many years. There is something all of us can do to improve our fowl for future generations.
Hello. Two to enlist, please.
Valiant Pigeon! Reporting for duty, sir!
Never heard of you.
Look at him. He's a perfect specimen. He's fast as lightning, strong as an ox, very tall for his height. Stand up, sit back down again.
Too small. You should be yay high, and you're not even hay high.
No! There's been a terrible mistake! No, come back! I've been Shanghai!
Okay, welcome to another episode of Bred to Perfection. I'm Kenny Troiano, founder of the Breeders' Academy, and today I'm here with Frank McLaughlin. He's one of the best pigeon raisers and breeders out there, and when I told my members that he was coming on the show, they got really excited. And I got to thank my friend Kirby Jackson for introducing me to Frank, because he saw where our similarities were, and that's what I wanted to dig into. And there's a couple of things I want to talk to him about that I find very interesting. So, Frank, why don't you let everybody know who you are, how you got started, give them an idea of where you've come from.
Well, with me, I started racing pigeons 50 years ago. In 1974 was my first season. I started with chickens and fancy pigeons, white fantail birds, and then evolved into the homing pigeons. My father thought I would like those because I enjoyed the fantails and I had let them out and they came back and I found it so exciting. So my father knew a pigeon fancier in the town we lived in, and we visited, and he raced. I saw the pigeon clock and the red check pigeons, the nest boxes, and that was it. I was hooked. So at 11 years old, I started. My first season racing was 12, and I've been doing it for 50 years straight. At 18, I was probably one of the best fanciers in the country, so I reached heights pretty quickly, and I've been at the top pretty consistently for over 40 years, which has been exciting. I've done extensive traveling. I speak all over the world on pigeons. My YouTube channel, I offer a lot of insights, something I started a couple years ago. The way I think, I'm a very basic, keep it simple, keep it natural, superior genetics, and you need great pigeons. And then I do a lot of things for fanciers that don't have a lot of time. My methods are good for the working guy because it can take a lot of time when you're competing against retired fanciers. So over the years in the sport, I'm what's called a professional pigeon fancier. So in 1998, I went into just pigeons. I left the working world, although I've been working nonstop ever since. And I started traveling to Belgium in the late 80s, buying great bloodlines and stock, selling their babies. And then I started importing and exporting and working for major races, promoting them and exporting birds to races. And for a while there, I was importing 3,000 pigeons every year to America, but it all became very labor intensive. So now I run an auction site. That's my main business. I sell my own birds and I compete. So it's been pretty exciting. I've had an excellent run. I've been blessed in the sport, and hopefully I'll have another 30 or so years doing it. That's the plan anyways.
Me and you had a talk like a week ago when we were setting up the call, and I told you that I have pigeons too. They're homing pigeons, but I've never raced them. So I sent you some pictures of them, and you're like, wow, they look pretty good. Maybe you should start racing them. Maybe put some in a race. And I thought about it. I've been thinking about it ever since. My biggest problem is that mine are white. For them to make it back, being as white as they are, I always wondered whether they would make it. So I'm hesitant.
Yeah, in these big one-off races, what fuels a lot of the pigeon sport right now is you'll breed babies and you'll send them off to a race. So they'll all be handled under identical conditions, trained, fed, all handled the same. And then they'll have these training races, pre-races, then a big major event, like leading up to the Kentucky Derby. So in these big races where there's several thousand birds, there's all kinds of colors. There's grizzles, there's whites, there's red checkers. Maybe in your own backyard, if you had one single white one, it might stand out. But in those big races, they blend in. I was at the Hoosier, which is one of the biggest races in America, the Hoosier $1 Million race. And 6 birds came together and one was pure white. It was an equal first. And they divided, nearly 500,000, if you can believe it, those 6 pigeons. So they have a chance. I saw the health and condition of your birds. They're exceptional. You do a good job with them.
And I don't give them as much attention. And it sounds like me and you are a lot alike in that you want to do it as simple as possible. You only have so much time to deal with your birds, but you want to win. I heard that a lot, quite a bit. And to give you an idea how I do things is I basically breed to the healthy. This is for my pigeons, by the way. And I let Mother Nature cull them. So anything that's slow or weak is going to get caught by the hawks. And whatever doesn't have the homing instincts just go away. You know what I mean? So I basically cull the sick. I breed towards resistance. I don't baby my birds. This is with my chickens too. I don't baby my birds. I don't clean or sanitize them or my equipment. They either have to adapt or they're gone. And if they get sick, and I haven't seen sick birds, not with my pigeons or my chickens in a long time, and I won't give them medications or antibiotics at all. So they have to survive. If they're not meant to be on my farm, they go away one way or the other.
It's so true. That's the biggest misconception in the pigeon world. Many of the fanciers do it. The birds practically live on antibiotics before breeding, after breeding. Every other race, they're treating for respiratory disease. They're treating for trichomoniasis or canker. And they're always treating, where I gave up on any type of flock treatments 11 years ago. And I'm the same way. I let nature take the weak out of the population. I don't want those genetics in my population. If they can't stay healthy naturally, then I really shouldn't be breeding from those pigeons in the first place. And my birds keep getting stronger. It's amazing. Like every year I race at the top over and over, like week after week of just good results. I vaccinate. In the pigeon world, we deal with paramyxovirus. It's like a Newcastle. And it's very tough on the birds. I do vaccinate, but I don't medicate. And much of the pigeon world is starting to believe it. A lot of them don't believe me, or they don't believe it can be done. But it can be done because I've done it. And you've done it with the chickens. So it certainly can be done. And the bloodlines and the breed will be much better for it.
Yeah, I think you're like me. We're fighting upstream a lot of times because sometimes it feels like we're the only ones that practice that kind of thing. You know, where we're not giving them medications and we're breeding to the healthy and getting rid of the sick. And it's the people who are always medicating, always giving antibiotics, babying their birds, trying to do everything to keep them alive. And yet they're the sickest birds out there.
Yeah, the people that worry the most, they have their waterers in the bleach every day, and they're cleaning the loft and sanitizing. And yeah, they have the most health problems. They're medicating not to have health problems, but yet it just perpetuates. They can't keep their birds healthy. And I know you'd mentioned about the sanitation. If you looked at my breeders, they're drinking from waterers. Now, I change the water every day, but I don't sanitize it. I don't scrape it. Like it has a film on it. It's different colors. But I think that a little bit of that bacteria, whatever's on the sides of the waters they're being exposed to, again, it just stimulates the immune system. It just makes them stronger. And I compare a lot to wild birds. You never see the wild pigeons dropping dead from anything. They're living under the bridge and eating what they can. And much of the time, they're healthy as can be. And then the weak out of that population, they don't make it. They take themselves out of the population of wild birds too. So it can be done.
The way I relate to this most is a lot of the feed stores around here knew about me. And so they would say, hey, can I bring my chicken questions to you? We get these customers. We don't know how to answer them. I go, sure, send them over to me. And the ones that had the sickest chickens were the ones that cleaned the most. They were cleaning up after every drop in. Everything had to be clean as can be. They bleached everything. And it was always those guys that had the sickest chickens. And I kept telling them, I like the deep litter system. Get them used to their environment and let them be exposed to those microorganisms. They need that.
They do, and I advocate that in the pigeon world too. Like many of them scrape the lofts continuously, like bare wood all the time. Birds are never exposed to their droppings, especially young pigeons. Much of their microbiome that's in their intestines, they get through the droppings of healthy pigeons. Like they get through picking around in this stuff. And it's the same with the chickens. If you take it all away all the time and it's sanitized, and then when they get exposed to something, then they have a problem, big problem. So you're better off letting that microbiome build up from the healthy ones, and it's passed on. And yeah, the birds, they do keep getting stronger.
We see that with the coccidiosis and worms, where they're working so hard to kill every coccidia in them, doing everything they can to kill every worm in them. And these guys are worming their birds every 2 weeks.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. And they don't understand that worms, coccidia, they live symbiotic with the body. So once you start doing that, you got to keep doing it.
That's something because, yeah, the healthy will definitely fight it naturally. Now, with the pigeons, we stress them. When we race them, they come back from a race, they're stressed. So a lot of the pigeon fanciers will test the droppings right after the race. And the coccidia is high, the trichomoniasis is high. Of course, the birds are stressed. But 3 or 4 days later, all that drops. All those levels drop back to a normal level. So the people are treating, and naturally, it would come back into the way it should be if they just waited a little bit, just rest the pigeon, just let them have a little bit of time. And yeah, I haven't treated for coccidia in 20 years. Like I stopped any type of coccidia treatment like years ago. And every other type of antibiotic, I stopped 11 years. And it's funny, people ask me all the time when I do my YouTube videos, well, what about coccidiosis? And I'm thinking, I haven't given coccidiosis a thought in 20 years. Yeah. And I've been at the top of the sport every season. So it's not a big deal.
No, coccidiosis is one of those things where it can be a management thing. Not that you have to keep anything spotless, but if you keep the dampness away, like us chickens, the chickens are always scratching their water into the litter, causing the conditions to be high for coccidiosis. And it's all about the loads. If the loads are high, they're going to suffer from coccidiosis. So if you can manage it a little bit, then you don't have those problems. But for the most part, you want them to be exposed to that. I don't know how to get through to these people. When I first started with chickens, when I was younger, I'm 61 right now, but my mentor came over and he saw all my chickens and they were just sick. I just had all kinds of sicknesses. I had every medication on my shelf you could think of. And I just assume, and even after talking to other chicken people, that was just the way it goes. You're going to have sick chickens, and you just got to treat them, and it was a common practice. And my mentor came over, looked at my chickens, and he was like, you need to start culling these and start breeding to the well. I go, no, Tony, I got it all handled. I got all the medications I need. Don't worry about it. He goes, well, let me see your medications. And I walked him into the shed where the medications were. And he just started throwing them in the trash can one after another, smashing them. I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm going to have to replace all these. And he goes, you can thank Uncle Tony. Now you just need to breed to the healthy, get rid of the sick, forget this medication stuff. And for the first 5 years, it was tough, especially the first year, because I felt like I was culling most of my birds. I thought, what did I do? But after about 5 years, to this day, I don't have a sick chicken. That was in the late 90s, by the way.
Wow.
And I haven't used antibiotics or medications since then. And I don't think I've used wormers in 15, 16 years.
Wow, that's terrific. Do you test for worms at all, or you don't even bother? Or?
What I do is every now and then I'll go in the pens and I'll look at their droppings. And if I were to see worms in there, maybe I'd do it then. But also, a lot of times if a bird is showing signs of worms, he's not doing too good, lethargic, maybe I do see worms in there, which I haven't in a long time. And I think that's why my birds are genetically resistant to many of the diseases, that if I have one bird struggling and the other birds are fine in the same pen, I'll just get rid of that one bird.
No, that makes total sense, because what a lot of people don't realize that the immune system will actually keep the worm load at a lower level.
That's
the
right.
Weaklings get loaded with worms, like they're full. But the stronger ones, they may have a handful. And like you mentioned earlier, and even in human populations, they're finding that if people had certain worms, they might not have as many bowel problems, the diverticulitis and things that we've wiped out, of our intestines. But there's almost, in some ways, they probably belong a little bit. Everything works together. But no, that's a good point with the worms, because I do worm the birds several times a year, but I'm not crazy worried about it or anything like that.
Yeah, I just tell my members, just try to keep it to a minimum if you feel like you need to do it, but definitely not every 2 weeks or every month.
Yeah, that's way over. But in what you had mentioned, getting back. If you don't overcrowd them and they're dry, they should stay healthy. Like I see people with pigeons, and if you pack 100 in a small little pigeon loft, okay, they're going to get sick. But if they have enough room, they have enough air, they have enough light, they shouldn't get sick. They just shouldn't get sick. But yeah, I think that a lot of it's common sense, but you'd be surprised how little common sense we have in the pigeon sport. And they're doing the same things that they were telling me when I was 12 years old. And they're doing what their grandfathers did. And it cracks me up that all these years and they're still applying systems or feeding or method or whatever from decades and decades ago. And it just keeps getting passed down. And I'll ask somebody, why do you do it? When I was a kid, I'd always ask why. Like, why does someone do that? And if they couldn't give me an answer, I'm thinking, well, then why are they doing it? If they don't know why, but a lot of people just do it because that's what their father did, that's what their grandfather did, and so on. You probably see the same in the chicken world.
Absolutely. It's rampant. We call it the old wives' tales and superstitions. They live by it. And that's the first thing I ask them. Explain it to me. Why are you doing that? What do you think you're gaining from it? A lot of times they cannot answer that. This is the way we've always done it, and it's worked for me. I either get, it's worked for me, I breed best of the best. And sometimes that doesn't always work, especially if you're going to create a family. There are areas within a breeding program where best of the best. But when you just have a bunch of crosses, a bunch of mongrels, best of the best doesn't always get you there, because eventually you're going to have to stop the flow of genes coming in before you can actually start a family. And we'll talk about that later.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. This show was brought to you by the Breeders Academy, where we will help you to increase your knowledge of breeding, advance your skills as a breeder, and help you to improve the quality and performance of your fowl. As a member, we'll provide you with the roadmap that you will need to create a true family or strain. I urge you to check it out. You've got nothing to lose, and you can cancel at any time. You also have a 30-day money-back guarantee. Simply go to www.breedersacademy.com to sign up.
The Breeders Academy will not only change the way you think about breeding, but improve the way you breed your fowl.
I hope to see you there. So let's get started.
But one of the things you said, which I totally agree with, was that a lot of people fight my system, fight the way I do things. And they say, well, you just don't live where I live. You're not living under the conditions that I live in. And I have members from all over the world. I got people in Mexico, I got people in the Philippines, and they're using my program, and it's working for them. So you can't tell me my system doesn't work. You're just not willing to do what it takes to get it done.
Yeah, it's the same thing in the pigeon world. I hear it all the time. Oh, I live in a cold climate. Oh, it's so humid where I live, and it's this and it's that. And I live in New England, and we have freezing cold, snowy winters. We have wet, damp, cold springs. We have high humidity, high heat summers, and then it wraps back around again. So I have every climate for my pigeons. So whether you live in a cold climate, a high humidity climate, my system's like your systems, the natural health, it works. And people are applying my pigeon systems around the world now and having super results. Just recently, someone contacted me and said, well, everybody here does it this way. And I'm thinking, well, that's probably the reason for you to change and do something different. If everybody's doing one thing, it's worth trying. And the results will come usually.
Back to the antibiotic thing, what I'm seeing in the chicken world, and you can tell me whether it's the same in the pigeon world, is that they're giving antibiotics whether the birds are sick or not. They see a storm coming, they're giving antibiotics. What they don't realize, antibiotics don't prevent the disease. You said it in your video, which I totally agree with. They either have it or they don't. And so if they're showing symptoms, maybe then, but I still think you're perpetuating a weakness. But they're filling up these big 5-gallon tubs full of medication with water, and they're going from bird to bird, just giving them antibiotics just because a storm's coming.
And we see the same thing in the pigeon world. They think they have to treat with the enrofloxacins before breeding. And I'm saying to myself, well, why are you treating healthy pigeons if they're healthy? I go into every breeding season, my birds are healthy, and I give them plenty of supplements, and they have all the minerals. Minerals are super important with pigeons, but I'm not medicating them other than vaccinating them. I'm not medicating, and people treat for the sake of treating. I have one fancier that I compete against, and he keeps his birds 365 days a year on a doxycycline Thailand combination. They live on that year round. His racing team, they live on antibiotics. And I'm there, wow, pretty frightening. The insides of the liver and kidneys must be toast after a couple of years, but I can't imagine. And he flies well, but I wonder if he came off the medication, all his pigeons would probably fall apart. That would be the end of it, because they live on the meds. Their whole career, they live on the antibiotics, which is just nuts.
Yeah, we're seeing that with the chickens too. They're giving antibiotics to baby chicks right out of the egg.
Wow. And it's funny, and at that stage, they have the best immunity they're probably going to have. They get the parental immunity from the egg, and early on, they've got a nice little immunity. And if you can work with that and build it. But yeah, there's people that start treating the babies right out of the nest too. They're treating them for canker, and they're worried that they're going to get sick. And again, with me, if they get sick, then I know they're a weakling. I'm glad they take their genetics out of my population, because a lot of times people are ended up breeding from pigeons that are weaklings. The only reason they were successful was because of all the antibiotics. Without that, they never would have been successful. But those genes are going to be difficult down the road, or especially if they go into somebody else's hands that's like me and doesn't medicate. Those birds will fall apart at the seams very quickly.
Yeah, people find it interesting that if I see a sick chicken, or I see a bird with problems, or even if I see a defect, if I see any bird that needs to be culled, I'm like, okay, cool. It's like you said, I get to get this bird out of my gene pool, out of the genetics, so I don't have to ever worry about this. Every time I cull a bird, whether it's for defects, sickness, disease, every time I cull a bird, I'm strengthening my line. That's how I look at it. So I look for the opportunity to get rid of whatever birds I can so that I'm strengthening my whole flock, my strain.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. Certainly, you want to get the weaklings out. With the pigeons I raise, there's a handful, and I call it failure to thrive. I have babies where they might be two in a nest, and one just doesn't grow right. It happens. No matter what you do, there's going to be something. It isn't like I never get sick pigeons. I get sick pigeons, but not many. And again, they take themselves out because they're going to stay on the team. They're going to continue to race and train, and the hawks or whatever. If a bird has a problem, the bird of prey knows exactly the one with the problem. That's the one they go after, the one that's slightly slower. They can pick out a problem a mile away. So everybody says it goes after your best ones, but that's because it wipes out the weaklings first.
It's funny you say that, because that's how I look at it. That's how I cull my birds, is I just let them out every now and then, let Mother Nature do it. And my birds, I've had them for 18 years. I've never added outside blood. And I just let them out every now and then to let Mother Nature do it. And they get faster. You know what I mean? They're nice and strong. They're really healthy. I've never worried about inbreeding whatsoever. And any birds that looked like they were struggling, they didn't show up. When I put them back in and lock them up again, they weren't there. And they have been getting better. And I haven't hardly done anything but just feed them.
I saw the health and the condition and the way they were acting. Your birds, there's some high quality there. And just because of the way you treated them, they've become stronger. And with the birds of prey, if a bird even has like a broken feather, it'll separate that bird out. I had one of my best hens, and she broke a flight feather, maybe about 7th or 8th flight on the wing, the 10 primary feathers on the wing. And I pulled it. And I said, well, it'll grow in before I get to the races where I'll need her. And at 2 miles, she disappeared. I lost her. So the hawk or falcon saw that bird with that missing feather and just keyed on that. In the next toss, she was gone, and she was a superstar. So the birds of prey, boy, they pick a weakness out very quickly.
Yeah, we're basically a breeding show. That's what my website's all about, is creating strains, maintaining strains, improving strains. But it's everything we can do on our show to encourage people to breed healthier birds by getting rid of the medications, getting rid of the wormers, the chemicals, and the antibiotics, because they just rely on those things so much. And it's like you said, sometimes I think if they were to stop those things, their birds would just fall apart and they wouldn't hardly have anything. But in the long run, that's what they need to do, because they're just raising weak birds. My frustration is that it's the beginners who are buying birds from these people. A lot of times they're not getting great birds in the first place, unless they go pick them themselves. And on top of that, a lot of times they're sick, and they're having to deal with that too.
Yeah, it's really a tough place to start. When I look to bring in birds, I try to find pigeon fanciers that kind of are along the same lines that I am, where they medicate at a minimum. And I think in the chicken world, they should probably do the same thing. And I keep my chickens. I breed black copper Morans and I am Samanis. It's like a little hobby. And I'm not as strict as with the pigeons. I breed the I am Samanis for just the blackest possible chicken. I don't keep records or anything. And the black copper Morans for dark eggs. And again, I get a clue of what's what, but the pigeons, everything is records and bands and pedigrees and all that kind of stuff. But the chickens are just something I do as a hobby, which I enjoy.
Vaccinations. Now, as far as this chicken, guys, I usually tell people basically vaccinate for the diseases that are prevalent in your area. Now, I understand why you vaccinate as much as you guys do. Your birds are in other populations. They're traveling across the country. I can understand why you guys do that. And they do improve their immune system by challenging their systems, even with those vaccines. So I don't have a problem with that. But do you want to talk to them about your vaccination program?
Well, with pigeons, I think because there's so much mixing, we have birds coming. Like when I was in the import business, I was bringing in 300 birds a month from Europe. So 300 racing pigeons every month, just me. And there were a couple other importers, and they're coming from all over. And then I import from South Africa and Zimbabwe and the Middle East. And boy, everybody has their issues. There's certain diseases in certain countries. And I advocate to cause this soup of different pigeons from different parts of the world, because a lot of times when you mix pigeons, they get sick. Like what is a non-issue in my loft will make somebody else's pigeons sick. So I tend to like to mix them from different places and have them build up their natural immunity to different things, and birds from that have been in Kuwait or South Africa, Zimbabwe, Belgium. Now, with us, we all vaccinate. The big one with pigeons is paramyxovirus, which is like Newcastles and chickens. And we're sending these birds to these big races where there's 2,000 or 3,000 birds coming in many cases from all over the world. So that's a biggie. We have to vaccinate for paramyxovirus when they're young. And rotavirus, I'm not sure. Do you deal with rotavirus in chickens?
I rarely hear about that one.
Yeah, that's been bad in pigeons the last 7 or 8 years. So I've been doing a PMV rotavirus combination, and it really helps. A lot of these things like the rotavirus causes secondary infections to go crazy. So it's not technically the virus that's getting them. It's the E. coli's jumping up, or salmonella's jumping up, or mycoplasmosis, like all these secondary type infections, because the rotavirus kind of brings the immune system down. So we try to get ahead of it. So the big things I vaccinate for would be paramyxovirus, which is Newcastle, rotavirus, and salmonella. They have some good salmonella vaccines in the pigeon world, and I use them. Whether it makes that big of a difference with the salmonella, I'm not sure. And I'm a believer that if we never vaccinated, there's going to be 10% of the pigeons that are going to be immune to it. Like any disease, any virus, it's going to wipe out a big percent of the population, but there's always a handful that are going to be immune to it, and they're the ones that breed, and then all of a sudden there's a strain that are resistant to these. But nobody can take that chance and try to wait it out for the next 20 years with these viruses that we're dealing with, especially the amount of money in the racing and the things that we're doing. Yeah, there's going to be a few immune individuals in the population, even with these viruses.
So the one that's similar to Newcastle's, they can actually carry it without being symptomatic with that one?
No, they're usually symptomatic. But the problem is, before you see the symptoms, it's already spread. It spreads through the loft rapidly like crazy, and then the birds start getting symptoms, but it's too late. It takes about 2 or 3 weeks after they're exposed for them to show. And why? It's funny. It's possible they carry it, or some carry it and pass it, because nobody's sending pigeons to these races that have like a Newcastle in their home loft. But boy, it jumps up. You mix these birds from all over the world or all over the country, and it definitely jumps up. And it's so contagious, the pigeon Newcastle. In my barn at my home, I kept birds for my export business or my auction business. But right now, at the time, was for my export business. And I had people send me some fancy birds. And after a couple of weeks, they got the Newcastle type, the paramyxovirus. Their heads were spinning around, and they were all rolling around the floor. Then they would gain their balance again. I panicked a little bit. But 10 minutes away was where I keep my pigeons, and I got lax with the vaccinations at the end of the season. I didn't vaccinate like 10 babies at the end of the season, and every single one of those babies came down with that paramyxovirus. Whether I carried it over on my clothes, on my shoes, and amazing. It's really a very virulent, or it's very contagious. I can't get the word out. Yeah, so we're really careful about that. And now with chickens, are you guys vaccinating for Newcastle or anything like that? If you come in and do a show or?
Not as a practice, although I'm working with Dr. Gallardo from UC Davis and the California Department of Food and Agriculture. I have them on my show from time to time, helping them with the program that they call the Gamefowl Wellness Program. Because in California, we had a huge hit with Newcastle's in 2003, and then a few years ago we had it, and it wiped out a lot of birds. And so they came up with this vaccine where it's a drop in the eye, and they're getting a number of farms to participate, trying to get ahead of this thing, because they do feel that it's going to happen again, because people are bringing birds from Mexico, and that's where it's coming from. And so they don't feel like they can control it, and this is the way they're going to do it. So the program, it's going well so far. As a practice for all of us, like the average backyard breeder, I don't vaccinate for it, but I don't take birds off my farm. And I can't wait to talk to you about this by improving their health by challenging their immune system. It's something I want to talk to you about. And although I don't do that, I keep a very closed yard, a very controlled yard. I don't expose my birds to other birds. We practice, or we should, a lot of us, quarantining the birds, making sure that they're not carrying anything, making sure they're not able to pass anything to our birds. So we do practice good biosecurity. I am very interested in what we're going to talk about because there's some really cool things about it. It's interesting. It's a neat concept. It's something that if I could find a way to implement into my program without introducing laryngotracheitis, Newcastle disease, and maybe mycoplasma, those are the big ones that really affect our fowl. But that's what I want to talk about, is improving the immune system through exposure, because that's something you guys do quite a bit. I know you do for sure.
Yeah, we don't really have a choice. If you're in the pigeon world and you're competing in races or shipping them out to one-off races, and they get mixed. And if you compete at a club level where you bring in 300-400 birds together and they go on a truck with all the other clubs, so it's constant exposure to everybody's everything. So the weaklings get whacked pretty quickly. So we do have a lot of mixing. And after these races, the birds come back. Like they'll ship the birds back to you. So they've competed. So now they're coming back from after being mixed with 3,000, whether it's in South Africa or Zimbabwe or Indiana. So it's a constant. And now with me, I advocate in the pigeon world, because we mix them so much, is to bring pigeons in from different places, different parts of the country, different fanciers. But you want to make sure your birds are, fully vaccinated and as healthy as possible. You don't want to bring these birds in if your birds have a weakness, because it can wreak havoc on the birds. So I'm not afraid of mixing. And it's funny, on several occasions, I've imported a bird from, say, Belgium, and they're quarantined in Belgium for 1 month, and they go to the USDA for 1 month, and then they'll come to me, and I'll usually keep them a week or so in a cage, and I'll vaccinate them, worm them, spray them for parasites, and I'll throw them in with my pigeons. And within a week, they're sick. They're ready to die. They just went through 2 quarantines, and they mix with my birds, and it's unbelievable how many times I've seen it. And my birds look great. They're healthy as can be. So a lot of these pigeons, they just can't take it. But I'm not sure. It would be an interesting concept if you had a neutral place where everybody, some friends around the country, could take 3 or 4 of their chickens and get them to pen them up together from 20 different people and let them live for a while, then bring them back when they're all nice and healthy, bring them back into their own flock to bring all those new microbiome stuff and problems and everything into your own flock.
That's an interesting thought, actually. Yeah, that's a very interesting thought. Well, we have chicken shows, so they're exposed to all kinds of stuff there. Yeah, but the idea of sharing birds and then letting them all get exposed together, that is interesting. One of my friends, he passed away recently, but he was a judge for the American Poultry Association, but he also showed birds, and he was adamant. He goes, I have no problem showing my birds anywhere and just bring them into my flock. And he never really had an issue, and I always thought that was a ticking time bomb. I'm like, damn, Danny, you're asking for it. You're going to get it. He goes, I've never had a problem with it. Birds get sick. His thought was they can't become resistant to anything they haven't been exposed to. They have to be exposed first, and then they build a resistance from there. And he felt it strengthened his flock overall.
Yeah, and I feel the exact same way with the racing pigeons that, the more exposure, the more challenge to the immune system, the better it is. If you have a closed group that's never exposed to anything, and as soon as they get mixed, they're going to get sick. And I see it with the pigeons too. A lot of people, they're so afraid to mix, so they don't bring anything in. And one pigeon will come in and their whole flock is getting sick. But it's scary too. You get a good, healthy flock, you haven't medicated for years, and you might have some issues. But if the immune systems are strong, like your chickens, they wouldn't have an issue. They might go off a little bit. A few of them might feel it, but they would battle it and be stronger for it. I don't think there'd be
I think you're right. They're not like delicate daisies out there, okay? But I think we'd have to do what you guys do if we're going to do that kind of thing. And we'd have to vaccinate for just about everything that's out there, bronchitis and the whole bit.
Yeah, I would only do it if your birds are fully vaccinated because, that's where it gets ugly when you bring in these things that are not vaccinated. And the vaccines, there's certain vaccines that say if paramyxovirus only killed 1% or 10%, I probably wouldn't do it, but you're going to have nearly 100%. You're going to lose like nearly 100%. So you really have to be adamant about certain vaccines. And there might be things where you might only lose 10%. So would I vaccinate for that? No, I'd probably want to get those out of the population. But I'm not too familiar what the death rate is on those chicken issues. I should mention we also vaccinate for pigeon pox, which is very similar to chicken pox. And the only reason we do that is because you don't want your bird to be coming down with pox right before a big final race or something. They get it once, they get over it, and it's fine. But you don't want to deal with that near a big event. So I tend to vaccinate the babies when they're young for pigeon pox, so then they never have to worry about it after that.
A friend of mine, he's had his birds for years. I think he had them for 20 years. And at that point when I knew him, he wasn't having an issue with coccidiosis at all. And his wife bought some hatchery chicks because she wanted eggs. And the hatchery offered to have her birds vaccinated for coccidiosis. And she's, oh, what the heck? Oh, now they're protected from coccidiosis. Let's do it. Well, what they didn't realize was, I think there's 8 or 9 different species of coccidia that affect different parts of the body. And the vaccine actually covers like 5 of them, 5 of the most common. Well, his birds were immune or had some resistance to coccidia, but not to all of them. So when they brought these birds on the farm that were vaccinated for coccidiosis, when they got old enough, they mixed them with their flock. Man, he had coccidiosis popping up all over the place. He was losing birds left and right. It was even affecting the older birds. And you usually don't see that. But he fought through it. He worked through it. To this day, his birds are healthier than ever. And again, doesn't have problems with coccidiosis. So it goes back to that thing. They're never going to become immune to something they've never been exposed to. And sometimes some diseases, maybe they do need to be exposed to it so they can build immunity and be stronger for it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do that with my pigeons. I mix them. I challenge their immune system, and I'm not too worried. Like my breeders are my most important birds. They've been around forever. They've been exposed to everything. So I'm not too worried about ever adding a new bird to the flock. If anything, it's the new bird I add that's going to have the issues, which is funny. But yeah, the more you challenge the immune system, the stronger it is. Like we may go to Mexico and drink the water and get sick. The people there, they never have a problem. And a lot of the immune systems in people itself, the kids just don't have it like they used to. In third world countries, their immune system is so much better. They have so much more exposure to things. And our kids, they're sanitized and they can't touch anything and they're not exposed, especially city kids, to anything. Maybe if you lived on a farm, you'd have a lot more exposure. But I think people are having a big issue with very weak immune systems. I treat myself like the pigeons. I don't take anything. I try to let the body heal itself. I'm not stupid if it looks like life or death, but for the most part, usually you recover. I have an assistant that the kids have a sore throat for half a day and they're at the doctors and begging for antibiotics. And give the kid a few days to recover. Yeah. They're not going to die in a day from a sore throat. Or it's a mindset. It's like they want that antibiotic to fix them quick. And it's the same with the pigeons. I wait it out. And on some of my videos, If I have a sick bird, I will treat them individually. I'll give them a chance. Everybody, as a child, we all got sick. I'll give them a shot. If it's something special and it gets sick, I will treat it individually, but I'll leave it with the others. Like I let that bird boost the immune system of the others. So the sick one is living with the healthy ones. And if it doesn't bounce back, well, that's fine. And I'm not really going to treat it a second time if they get sick again. And more often than not, I'm wasting my time because the ones that get sick, they're going to get sick again in the future.
Exactly.
And,
that's how I look at it too. It's usually chronic. Once they get sick, they become symptomatic. I rarely see them come out of it fully, or they get sick again. And so when I see a sick bird, I yank it out of the pen as fast as I can and get rid of it, just because I look at it as a weakness. Once I see a sick bird, I never want to breed to that bird because I believe that bird's going to bring the rest of them down. And so, yeah, because you're right. No matter how big a flock you have, small or big, and how healthy they are, you're going to have some sick ones down there. There's going to be some weak links, and you got to deal with those. Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
no, it's true. A lot of people think they're never going to have a sick bird or we're all going to have them. And where it comes from or why, who knows? But some of genetically just don't have it. They just have a weakness. But at least the way you do it and the way I do it, we get to see the weak ones. They show themselves, where most of the pigeon world, they don't show themselves because they're living on antibiotics from one thing to the other. And it's pretty scary. And that's why we're getting these super bugs and antibiotic resistant bacteria and all that sort of stuff. The bacteria is adapting as fast as the birds are adapting. It's mutating quickly too to beat what it's being thrown at. So
I talk to so many people that raise birds in the Philippines, and that's what I hear all the time. Oh, our conditions are completely different than yours. We could never survive without those medications. And I'm thinking to myself, first of all, there was a time when we didn't have medications or antibiotics, and those birds did just fine. And so why all of a sudden you think you need them? And then I have members over there, they followed my suggestion. They were like, oh, I hope Kenny knows what he's talking about because I'm losing some birds here and there. And then they fought through it. A few years later, they called me up and they said it was the best thing they ever did. They just make sure that the breeding birds are never exposed. They practice biosecurity. There are some things you got to do to make this work unless you heavily vaccinate them, do what you do. And even then, you're going to have issues. But that was the thing I've heard mostly is, I hope Kenny knows what he's talking about. And then they come back to me and say, yeah, it was tough. I had to trust you, but it was the best thing I ever did. But the idea that we've never had medications, there was a time we didn't have medications or antibiotics, and the birds survived. We knew how to suck them in.
It's so true. I talk about that a lot too. When I was a kid, we may have wormed them a couple times a year, and we had, I'm trying to think what the canker medication, not canker. Well, canker, we had an Emtril and a coccidiosis medication, but we may have done it once a year, and everybody's birds were just fine. They weren't medicating with all these harsh antibiotics over and over, and we raced and we bred. And in the 90s is when it switched in the pigeon world, where everybody started getting into a lot of antibiotics. And I was doing it too. I was medicating for one thing 1 week, and then 2 weeks later a respiratory, and then 2 weeks later like a canker, and then everybody was falling into the same thing. But yeah, I'm glad I decided that's it. They don't need it. They lived for 1 million years without us doing it, and they'll probably live long after we're finished with them. So they do great.
Yeah. Like I said, when my mentor threw all those medications in the trash can, I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Because getting a sick chicken seemed like the normal thing. I was always fighting diseases, and they just were never getting better. But what he did for me was the best thing he ever did for me, because I just stuck with it, and it's been good ever since. The biggest thing for most people, and it sounds like it is with pigeons too, is trying to keep the stress down. Because if you can keep the stress down, a lot of those diseases aren't going to surface.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing with the pigeons. If they're not overcrowded, they have good ventilation, the loft is dry, they have some sunshine. Yeah, they should stay pretty healthy. They should stay very healthy, actually. And if people are getting sick birds and they're doing everything right, they have some pretty weak birds. And I raise chickens too. I never get a sick chicken. I get a couple of babies that are deformed or something. There's something not right with a chick now and again, but my chickens, I free range them, and they live and they're around the pigeons, and there's never an issue. And I can't even remember the last time I've had a sick chicken, but it's all natural. And when I was in Oregon, I lived in Oregon for 4 or 5 years, and my German Shepherd was sick. This was probably around 2004, and the dog had diarrhea, and he was upchucking. I thought the dog was going to die, and I didn't have a vet. I had just moved to Oregon. And I found a vet and I went there and I thought he was going to put the dog on some real harsh antibiotic. And he comes out with a tube of oregano paste. And I'm there, what's that? And he said, it's oregano paste. He goes, it works better than the antibiotics. And I'm looking at him thinking, this dog is dying here. And he squirted that tube of oregano, held the dog's mouth shut. The dog was spitting, it stunk. And within an hour, that dog was almost better. And it started me into my oregano craze. So I've used a lot of oregano the last 20 years or so in the racing pigeons. I'm not sure if they use it in the chickens.
Oh, yeah.
So I even actually started promoting an oregano and cinnamon product because one of the big vets I met in Zimbabwe was saying that cinnamon also has a positive effect on the microbiome, and oregano is like a natural essential oil. It's almost like an antibiotic, but again, doesn't affect the system. So we could always put a link if you want in the description. And I approached the company and I liked their product, and they take 5% off if people order it. They give me a little bit kickback, but I advocate the oregano products and I've been using them for years and it's helped. But it's funny, when I went to Natural Health, I was so afraid of sickness that I was oregano like nearly every day. I was giving them apple cider vinegar on off days and I'm mixing garlic in the water. And I was so fearful that if I didn't do something, the birds were going to get sick. And then about 3 years ago, I said, wait a minute, will my birds not stay healthy if I don't give them all this natural stuff? So I stopped all the natural stuff. I just water, minerals, good feed, and they were fine. So they will do great. But I also feel when someone is switching to natural health, I think it's best to use some of these products like an oregano product to help get over the hump, to get to the level where the birds can be healthy without anything. And I think the oregano products helped me early on. And I still use them I use them a few times a week for the racing birds, and I give it to the breeders. I think it's more for me than it is for them.
No, I'm a big proponent of natural products like oregano, apple cider vinegar, garlic, all that kind of stuff. And I promote it and I encourage people to do it. But to be honest, I don't do it out of laziness. I just don't have time to do that kind of thing. And my birds, like you said, are healthy out there. So I haven't suffered from it, but I do believe those are great products.
I noticed with the racing season last year, I had a strict natural products for my racing season, and I would use certain things throughout the week because I wasn't using any antibiotics, and I used to fly like crazy. And then last year I was so busy I didn't do any of it, and I had a tremendous season. So this year I give them apple cider vinegar a couple days after the race, and that's pretty much it. I use Red Cell, the horse vitamin. It's been around forever. I do it for the iodine. They get that once a week. But the rest of it is minerals, grain, water, and they're just great. They're fine.
As far as supplements and those kind of things, I don't have a big problem with that kind of stuff. My biggest problem is people overdo it. They use it too much or they give too much at one time. So I always tell people, if you're going to do that, use it sparingly. Like a lot of these supplements, if it says teaspoon per bird, give them half that. Because all you're doing is you're trying to supplement the feed. And then my concern would be, okay, well, if you think you need the supplements, let's see if we can improve the feed. Then maybe you don't need the supplements. So that's where I go with it, because there's some supplements that are out there that are making the rounds that people are using. They're encouraged to use a lot of it. And then they come back to me and say, what's happening to my birds? They're losing muscle. They're like getting thinner. They're not doing too well ever since I've been using the supplement. And it's getting people in trouble. That's what I'm finding.
Yeah. In the pigeon world, it's the same thing. They overdo it. When my birds come home from a race, I mix up a concoction in their water to help with recovery, but it's very weak. People, they overdo it. Yep. And whenever there's something in my water, it's very weak. It's very dilute because I don't want to tax the system with the supplements. And with the pigeons, we have a lot of different good grain mixes. We don't use a lot of pellets in the pigeon world, but there's a lot of grain mixes. But they usually have problems with getting mineral deficient. So we have a lot of mineral combinations, mineral blocks, mineral mixes, and the super minerals sold for pigeons, racing pigeons, that makes the biggest difference with raising babies and keeping them healthy, because the mineral deficiency is what really gets them more so than the vitamins. But I think most of the chicken worlds, they feed a pellet, like they don't feed a lot of grain.
The gamefowl world, they feed a lot of grain, not enough pellet. And I try to get them to use an equal amount of both or balance it out, because I think a lot of the feeds that they're feeding their fowl are deficient because too much grain. A lot of our vitamins, minerals, and all the good things, the proteins are in the actual pellet. There's some good things in grains. And I know chickens and pigeons are different. I want to talk to you about that because I'm probably not feeding my pigeons properly. But yeah, that's the biggest thing is they're either feeding them too much pellets or too much grains.
I see.
Yeah. But this is for me. Okay, I'm feeding, and I have for years, and I probably give them too much pellet. But I'm basically feeding my pigeons what I feed my chickens. Is that a really bad thing to do?
No, you're not racing. That's fine. I used to raise all my babies on just layer pellet, like a 16% layer pellet. I would fill the breeders' feeders with that. It was easy. I don't live at my pigeon loft, so I go once a day. So it's easier to use feeders and things like that. And the grain, they throw it all over the place. But I tend to believe, and I did a video on it, that I've seen pigeons that when you just feed the adult pigeons and they pump their babies grain, I think they just have a stronger internal system. Like their gizzard is stronger from grinding the grain as just a baby. And everything about them, their intestines are stronger because a pigeon raised on pellets his whole life will have a bigger dropping than a pigeon raised on grain its whole life. It seems like the intestine doesn't have to work as hard when it's developing, digesting pellets than grain. So I'm an advocate with the pigeons for competition. It's best to feed the grains because I think that internally is stronger when you feed grain. The pigeon looks the same externally. It's still the same animal and they develop excellent, but I'm more of an advocate of grain, but I supplement all my birds with pellets. I have a feeder of chicken pellets in with all my breeding pigeons, and they probably eat about 10% chicken pellet. The rest is like these grain mixes, these made for pigeon grain mixes. But what are you feeding your pigeons? Just every day, you're not trying to compete. That's excellent. They're healthy. They're getting up everything they want. I use the chicken pellets mainly for the minerals and protein and the different supplements that's in it.
Before we get into the breeding, my wife wanted me to ask you, how long do pigeons live? Because I have no idea how old those guys are out there. I never see a dead pigeon in my pen. I don't know if they're getting weeded out as they're flying around, but I've had these things for 18 years. I rarely have a bird that just dies from old age.
Yeah, it's funny. They live about 15 years. They can go much longer, but 15 is a good lifespan. Usually at that point, they're not fertile. You can see them. They start to go down a little bit. But 15, I've had them over 20. But their competition to 5, they can compete up to about 5. And usually by 10 or 11, it's the end of their breeding career. They start to slow down. Some pigeons stop fertiling or breeding, producing eggs 10, 11, 12 years old. But no, there's a good chance that the weaklings get taken out. But it's funny, though, that you haven't seen some old timers just get old and die in there. The birds I saw didn't look old. They looked all within several years old. They were a relatively young looking group. So
yeah, that was last year, I think. That picture, it was on my phone. I said, I'll send them this.
Yeah, no, it's very nice. But yeah, I think you may want to water bands so you can keep track when the babies are whatever 6 days old. Every year buy the 2024 bands, the 2025 bands. So then at least 5 years from now, this pigeon's 6 and this pigeon's 2. You can have some idea what's out there and you keep track that way. How many pair do you keep?
I got about 50 birds out there. That's all I could tell you.
Oh, yeah, it's a good amount. Yeah. But so it's a little bit of work. Banding them and stuff is a pain to keep up with it. But even if you did a handful every year just to see.
You were saying in the video that you have a breeding season, that they don't produce all year round. But I could swear that my birds are producing birds all year round.
Well, if I left my pigeons together, yes, some would produce year round. And I'm not sure why that is. But normally, if you leave them together year round, they stop when the days get short. Usually around September, October, they stop breeding, and then they'll start again in February. So when I've left the pigeons together when I was a kid, I didn't have space to put them in different sections and things. And pretty much across the world, they stop breeding their winter, and then when the days get longer, they start to get longer. Nature kicks in, and they'll start breeding. You probably have less babies. Certain pairs will breed through the winter, but this time of year, they're all full force breeding. They're probably raising babies like crazy right now.
Well, I might take you up on the offer. I might call you up and say, okay, what do I need to do? Let me increase my numbers a little bit so I have some to send. Or you tell me what I need to do. But I actually wouldn't mind getting into the racing scene. It sounds fun. I always wanted to do it. Getting you on the show is a part of my bucket list. I always wanted to get a good pigeon breeder because I do raise pigeons. I do have some pigeon breeders. And so I'm just so glad to get you on the show. But yeah, me and you might connect a little bit. And I might just do that. Put my toe in the water and see what I think about it. Because it sounds like fun. It really does.
Yeah, what's good about the pigeon world is you don't have to compete in a club level. Like we all compete in a club level and we get together and we ship the birds on a Friday night and they race over distances and they wear a computer chip and it's not whose bird is home first because we live in different areas. It's whose bird averaged the fastest speed in yards per minute. But if you want to do it at a different level where you're not working at it all the time, you raise some babies, you enter them in a race, you follow them on the internet, you watch the results, and it's exciting. And you can hit for big prizes. And there's different levels of races. There might be a $100 entry race, which is fun, and there could be $750 or $1,000 entry race, which is more a different level. Most people start with the lesser type races to get their feet wet, but it's fun. And with the internet, it's amazing. We watch everything. You can watch the birds come home live, and it's pretty good.
If I didn't get into chickens a long time ago, I'm 61. I've probably been doing it for 50 years. But I think I would have got into pigeons. I really do. Yeah. So this is something I'm really interested in. We are a breeding show, and I did want to dig in with the other stuff, but now I've been following you a little bit and trying to get an idea of your breeding techniques. And so I'm interested to see your point of view on all this. You were saying all the great pigeons were crosses. Okay.
Yeah. In the pigeon world, there's been a lot of good inbred pigeons, but the pigeons that have changed the sport, like birds we talk about for 20, 30 years, they've all been crosses. Like it's amazing that these unrelated parents bred a superstar and then that pigeon went on to breed generation after generation, like for all over the world. So yeah, some of the best ever have been crosses. And again, there's great inbred breeders, but like I talk about the game-changing pigeons, the ones that the whole world talks about, they've all been crosses, which is pretty wild.
Okay, so you get the crosses, you compete with them, they do really well. Are you breeding to those birds? Are those the birds you're actually entering into your breeding program?
Like the cross pigeons that do well?
Yeah.
Yeah, we want to breed a lot from the performance pigeons. So if they were very successful, and I've said that what's good, what has the genetics, what can home, what has the heart, the lungs. So more often than not, the performance pigeon, the pigeon that's done really well, will be a good breeder. And most of my top breeders have been crossed pigeons. And occasionally I will do some inbreeding, but in the pigeon sport, they inbreed, line breed, and outcross. And they don't really have a rhyme or reason for it. But if you're going to inbreed the pigeons, the mother and father better be super. They better both be performance, whether a super breeder or a super racer. People think, oh, I've got this champion, I'm going to breed it to its daughter that's never done a thing, and I'm going to breed all these super breeders. If the daughter is a champion or won a bunch of races, then I'm okay with that. But in the pigeon sport, people inbreed for the sake of inbreeding, and they're getting away from performance. But most of what I do is crossing. I cross the best of the best, but I select type, the super feather, super buoyancy. My pigeons handle like cork. They may look big, but in the hands, there's no weight. Like I keep selecting for pigeons that they're a handful, but they're so light and buoyant. And those pigeons fly like the wind. So a lot of what we do is feather quality, conformation, and corkiness, because they are competing over distances. So you can select for a lot of that. And I've been selecting for years for much of that.
No, I agree with you when it comes to inbreeding that if you're not doing it properly, you're doing it wrong. If you're just inbreeding for the sake of inbreeding, that's not the way to do it. And I'm a firm believer that it's the offspring that actually prove the worth of the parents. And I wouldn't breed a great father to just any of his daughters thinking I'm going to move forward. That I would want to make sure that the daughter I'm breeding has proven herself, which that would be a good mate to her father. So the only problem I have with it, well, there's a couple things. I understand the idea of breeding winners with winners. But for the average person, how they know they're getting a winner and how do they get the winners? Because I don't know if the average person can get those kind of fowl, those kind of birds, right?
Yeah, no, most of the people, they're buying like grandchildren to the superstars. because the real superstars of the sport, they're just too expensive to buy children of the great pigeons. So they can buy grandchildren of the great pigeons. And then it's trial and error. You hope you're getting a couple generations away from the best pigeons. But I think in the pigeon sport, I laugh. Everybody had 10th grade genetics and they think inbreed, line breed, outcross, they're going to get this hybrid vigor and they're going to fly like the wind. But it isn't necessarily the case.
Not
But
always, yeah.
if I'm going to inbreed, both parents better be super. And then you can have a little bit more faith in that. But I think most of the sport in the pigeon world, they inbreed for the sake of inbreeding, and then they outcross, and they're not necessarily, they have two children, half brother, half sister of a famous bird, and they breed them together thinking those children are going to breed them all kinds of champs. But neither pigeon had any performance to it. But most of the great ones have been the crosses, which is really weird. But we're racing over distances, and it's all performance with the pigeons. Now, if I was breeding for like show type, like I traveled, there's a big show in England, the Blackpool show, where 50,000 fanciers come in and they have all kinds of vendors and auctions around the town, but they have a massive show. And some of the people have these show homers and they're just so beautiful. And the type and the feather quality and the conformation, it's off the planet. And all that's done with inbreeding. I'm not sure if they could fly across the street. They probably couldn't, but they're magnificent specimens.
Yeah. So the people who are buying offspring from the winners, those are probably inbred, right? They're probably breeding them to produce more of them, right?
The most expensive birds, people inbreed. A lot of the Europeans, they inbreed for sale because everybody wants to buy the inbred birds off the champions. So a father-daughter mating off a champion bird is more valuable than him crossed out to an unrelated bird. And me personally, I'd rather have two unrelated champions bred together. I think my odds are better. And after studying pedigrees in the pigeon world for 50 years and talking to these old timers that have been doing it their whole lives in Belgium, they want to pack as many unrelated champions in the pedigree as possible for performance. Like if all four grandparents are all superstars, your odds of getting some super babies are increased. And that's a lot of the thinking with many of the Europeans.
That's interesting. So when they're packing those winners, are they packing new winners in every generation?
Yeah, most of the top fanciers, they have a line. And whereas their birds are related to a certain pigeon, but then they're constantly bringing in top pigeons to breed. And if it's successful, they keep them going. If it's not, they take them out of the population. But most of the time, they're always looking to bring in another top performance bird to cross in. They're constantly crossing performance birds into their pigeons, their existing pigeons. And if it works, then that becomes a pigeon that they're breeding from and so on.
I can see why they would have to do that because, like, if you have a winner and you breed it to another winner that's not related, basically you are getting hybrid vigor. Basically what you're also doing is you're recombinating the genes. If you look at meiosis and you look at how the crossover event works, you're basically recombinating genes. You're creating new, unique gametes. That way the offspring, you get a lot of variation. They're unpredictable. And so you can't guarantee that their offspring are going to be great. You just got to find the ones that are. So that's why I'm more about the inbreeding where I can improve them. If I'm looking to get them faster and I'm trying to get them to be better racers and better homers, then I'm always going to select the ones from the offspring that are better, and I'm going to slowly get there. When you're crossing birds that are unrelated, you're getting the hybrid vigor, and you're getting birds that are faster and better and stronger and all that. You are getting birds that are better than their parents because of hybrid vigor. But to actually improve a family, it doesn't sound like you're actually creating a family, are you?
Yeah, see, in the pigeon world, there's probably a big difference is like maybe in the chicken world, there's bloodlines or different breeds. Like I am Samanis and my Black Copper Morans that I can mess with. But in the pigeon world, they're all the same. Like they're all the same strain. There's some are more specific for short distance races. Some may be more better for long distance races, but there's no difference. We're all dealing with the same breed across the board. So, and ultimately, they're probably all related somewhat anyways because of they originated like in Belgium 120 years ago. I forget the two bloodlines that they crossed together to create the modern homing pigeon, a racing pigeon. But yeah, we're all dealing with the very same. If all of us had I am Samanis, everybody in the country was breeding I am Samanis, that's the pigeon world. That we're all having.
I'm not challenging you. I'm just trying to understand it because I live in a different world where I'm trying to create a family and improve them over time, looking for traits that are a little better each generation to a point when I got more predictability. I know what I'm going to get. There's no surprises. Whereas if I'm just bringing in new blood all the time, I never know what I'm going to get, actually.
No, it's very true. And that's how the pigeon world worked up until probably when I was a kid. Everybody wanted to create a group of pigeons in their loft that were all related, and it was like their own bloodline, their own strain, or they could call it their own name, whether it's the McLaughlin pigeon or something. And that's how it used to be, where everybody was working to have their own certain type. But over the last 20 or 30 years, it's gone just the opposite direction, where people are just bringing in all different unrelated birds and breeding them. But we're always looking for performance. Whatever can cover that race course the fastest and the straightest line, they're the ones we're striving for all the time. Again, type is important too. They can't be flawed. You have to have pigeons that are aerodynamic and strong but flexible and super feather. The ones with great feather quality, I'm sure you see it in your chickens too, but the ones with great feather quality are usually the better birds. So I always select for very buoyant, very corky type pigeons with great feather. It's like super soft, silky feather. And I'm not sure if that feather, I know it's genetics, but I don't know if it cuts the air faster, if it's less drag because it's so silky and soft than a rougher feathered pigeon. Maybe they can generate quicker speeds, or that just pigeons with great feather have just a better genetics or have a better immune system. But the ones with the best feather quality, more often than not, turn out to be the better birds. And that's one of the big things I select for, the feather quality.
No, I would imagine that has a huge influence on how well they do, because I'm a big complete package kind of guy. We see this in the chicken world and it just doesn't work, and they don't realize it, and they don't realize the results they're getting that seem to be good and very fleeting and temporary. That is a hybrid vigor, and they're always bringing in new blood. They get these offspring that are exceptional, and then the next generation are crap. And they keep doing it. Every 3 years, they keep adding new blood, not understanding why. And they don't realize, too, that a lot of the traits that they're looking for, production, performance, all those kind of things, are what we call form and function traits, which are polygenic, which there's variation in polygenics, which means that to get the best birds, you always have to select to the best bird, the highest intensity for whatever trait you're selecting for. But that takes time. It never happens with one infusion. It happens over time. You have to keep breeding to the highest intensity over time before you get there. There are traits that take forever to get, but can be lost overnight by adding the wrong bird. And so that's what we're dealing with chickens, is they don't understand that they're better off taking the time to actually create a strain, improving those traits over time, calling the bad ones, selecting the best ones, instead of actually adding new blood, just recombinating the genes and just showing their family, if it is even a family, over time. So I was curious because, and you're not the only one, I was looking around, a lot of pigeon breeders breed the way you do, and you're successful. You're one of the best ones in your field, and you're doing really good. So it works for you. I just want to know, if I'm going to get into pigeons that way, is that how I have to do it, or am I good creating a family?
You probably could create a family. And what we find when we bring a pigeon in, we know pretty quickly if either it shows itself in results or it doesn't. So you bring something in, you try it, and then if it doesn't work, you move it out. You have your base pigeons. Like some of my pigeons go back to birds from the 70s, 80s, a lot of them the 90s. They're related to these same pigeons. And I'm trying other combinations. And if it works, yeah, we move forward. If it doesn't, we kind of part with them. But I keep trying to strive to move forward. And in the pigeon world, everybody's talking about famous pigeons from 20, 30 years ago, and they're trying to get babies from these old famous birds. But I'm looking forward. The pigeons are going to be better 5 years from now than they were 5 years ago. These birds, since I was a kid, it's amazing. They're so much better. They're so much faster in the last 50 years. They can fly into headwinds now, and they were tailwinds when I was a kid. they're making the same speeds into headwind. So we've done it where we keep improving it, not every generation, but over time, if you're selecting and moving forward, you can keep improving. And I think most of the sport has improved. The birds are much better than they were 50 years ago.
Yeah, no, that's what I tell my breeders is as long as the offspring are bearing the parents and you're moving in the right direction, you're doing good. So that's the key. Can't dispute that at all.
But
That's
you'll
the key.
also probably find, I know in the pigeon world, most breeders will destroy pigeons within 2 generations. They can have the best birds in the world, and within a couple generations, there's nothing left. And I've been pretty lucky. I don't know if it's a natural thing. I just have a knack or selection, but I still have pigeons that go back to the 70s and 80s that I'm winning with today. And it's crazy to think that you could give someone the best birds in the world and within a couple generations, I don't know if they have no stock sense or what, but they ruin them pretty quickly.
Yeah, we have that too. They'll get the best birds in the world. They don't know what to do with them. They don't know how to breed them. It goes in the wrong direction. They give up. They start adding new blood, and then they don't have the family anymore. And they spent thousands of dollars on these birds.
Wow.
Yeah. So we have a handful of breeders, but I know there's some that want to become pigeon breeders. Is there anything you want to let them know before we end it?
If they want to give it a try, they can certainly contact me and ask questions. We have a couple big organizations, the American Race and Pigeon Union, and I can give you the links to our big organizations.
Sure.
They offer a lot of help. The International Federation of Race and Pigeon Fanciers, and they have a lot of help and beginning programs, and they have lists of the local clubs and how to build a pigeon loft, and it's a great sport. I wish more younger people would get into it, but the kids, they're so into the instant gratification where I could watch my birds for hours. I enjoy watching the chickens in the yard, and the kids, it's boring to them, a lot of them anyways.
Yeah, we talked about it because I can't even get my kids involved. So
yeah, I'll give you the links. And if they have any questions, and we have a couple good organizations, but it's a lot of fun. It's a great sport, and we're competitive at the club level. It's not all about the bigger races. It's about the gambling. But at my club, I compete against 20 guys at my club and about 70 in the combine in the different clubs, and they're highly competitive. We're not racing for anything, just a handshake and winning a race. There's nothing to win, but these guys are serious, and it's fun. But there's worse hobbies. At least it's happening in the backyard, like with the chickens. You're not off in a golf course or on a boat somewhere. So,
no, I encourage everybody to check out your YouTube channel. You got a lot of great videos, a lot of good information. I learned a lot. I couldn't get enough of it. And you're a great teacher too. What's the name of your YouTube channel?
it would be McLaughlin Lofts, LOFTS, McLaughlin Lofts. And I guess you can put a link in the description down below. Frank McLaughlin Pigeons, that'll bring them to me. And I provide a lot of information, but a lot of it can apply. And I already have some chicken people that like my stuff and ask questions, and it's fun. But we're all real close. We're not too far with the two different breeds. They're very similar, and a lot of the care and everything we do is very similar.
You have a website too, right?
Yes, McLaughlinLofts.com. It's my personal website, and I have a lot of tips and articles, and people can take a look at my bloodlines, a lot of pictures of the pigeons. It's not like what's out in the street. A lot of people think that they're used to seeing the city pigeons, but I say it's comparing a racing pigeon to a city pigeon is comparing like a thoroughbred racehorse to a donkey. There's that big of a difference. When you see them up close and personal, they're not the same animal at all. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I'll make sure all those links get into the show notes. I got to say this before I get off, is I was watching one video, you were talking in front of, it sounded like it was a whole group of veterinarians, and I thought it was gutsy to teach healthcare and disease prevention and challenging the immune system in front of a bunch of veterinarians. I was like, that's gutsy.
It's funny you say that, because there's a couple of major pigeon veterinarians that call and ask me questions. And like these guys, like people I like, bouncing ideas off of them and certain things that I've found or that have worked. But it is funny, but a lot of it's trial and error, and I've dealt with thousands and thousands of birds. If you import 3,000 a year, you export a couple thousand a year, I've seen it all. Again, you talk biosecurity and keeping them healthy. I've seen it all, and I've had a lot of exposure to these things. But yeah, I know the seminar that I was given, and there were a couple veterinarians sitting there. And I had just listened to them speak too, and then I had to go after them. And But again, those guys are following a lot of what I do. So
Yeah, no, I agree. And it can feel intimidating. I have about 6 veterinarians that are part of my Breeders' Academy. But to teach them, we got to challenge the immune system. We got to get them away from medications and get away from the antibiotics. Yeah, I was thinking, that's gutsy.
yeah, that's their business too. It is tough, but it's funny. But that's great. I appreciate what you do. What you're doing is super for the chicken world. And
Oh, thanks.
that's awesome.
I do have a friend. His name's Peter Brown. They call him the chicken doctor. And him and I are really good friends. And he makes a living by selling medications, antibiotics, and pesticides and what have you. And he knows me. He goes, I'm all about getting rid of all that stuff, breeding towards resistance, and not exactly challenging the immune system, but strengthening it over time through selection. And I know I work against his business, but I do also say that, hey, if you do need medications, you feel like you need to do it, because sometimes you get birds from people that sometimes it's hard to get birds at all. And the birds you end up getting, they do have health issues. And you may need to medicate them just long enough to get offspring and then eventually move them off the medications as you go. So that's where I'm pro medication. But I tell them, hey, if you need any medications whatsoever for your birds, contact Peter Brown. He'll take care of you. But it's amazing him and I are friends because I'm so against all that stuff.
No, but I advocate the same thing. There are people, if their pigeons are sick and dying, you can build their immune system. When you get a bunch of weaklings from someone, you might have to, whether they use something to get them over the hump and then work towards the natural immunity. Because like you said, a lot of them would end up with nothing. From all the new birds that they brought in. And it took you 5 years. It took me a couple years with the pigeons. And I tell everybody the first year might be a little bumpy. It's hard. It's difficult when you see some sick birds. It's hard for people not to reach for the antibiotics. But once they can get through that, it's well worth it.
That's what I tell them too. It's ugly. It can be ugly. You can lose a lot of birds in the beginning, but the ones that survive are the strongest. And like I said, it did take me about 5 or 6 years. And my members, they take it on saying, "Oh, Kenny, I hope you know what you're doing." And then they get back to me 2 or 3 years later and they did it. I'm like, they only took 2 or 3 years. What happened to me? It took me 5 or 6 years, and I'm still no more than them. So I must have done something wrong. I don't know.
Oh, that's great. No, they work at it, and it is. I advocate over time, and I feel though, and you're probably the same way with your chickens. Like these people are competing against me. So if my birds keep getting stronger, their genetics are getting stronger, their immune systems are getting stronger, there's going to be a lot of catching up to do. So they better move to the natural health and try to get pigeons that'll be on the same level. Because
absolutely. Yeah.
That's great.
That's awesome. Hey, Frank, I want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge and experience. And I'm glad you did it. I'm so thankful for Kirby for introducing us. I like the way he did it, too. He wrote little biographies of each of us and says, Frank, meet Kenny. And how do you not connect after that? So,
well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you having me. I had fun. And yeah, hopefully if we can help a few people, that's great. And we're both trying to do the same thing, which is excellent, and 2 different birds. So yeah. It's wonderful. And thank you. If you ever want to have me back, you want to do a certain topic or something, just feel free. I had a blast.
Oh, awesome. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks for listening.
Yes, thank you again for joining us on the Bred to Perfection podcast show. This show was brought to you by the Breeders' Academy, where by becoming a member, you can increase your knowledge of breeding, advance your skills as a breeder, and take you and your fowl to the next level.
We can also show you how to create a strain from hybrid crosses or mongrel flocks, and help you to create, maintain, and improve your present strains. We urge you to check it out. You have nothing to lose, and you can cancel anytime.
To join us at the Breeders' Academy membership website, go to www.breedersacademy.com.
Best of all, I'll be there to help you every step of the way.
While you're checking out the Breeders' Academy, make sure to sign up for our newsletter, The Breeders' Bulletin. We provide a lot of free bonus materials and some great information that will take you and your fowl to the next level. Well, that's it for now.
We hope you join us next time for another episode of Bred to Perfection. We'll see you later.
Bye.